We need to move on this now, before it's too late. The stakes are too high to wait. In November of 2022, a quiet college town in Idaho became the center of a crime that would shock and
Most people think the worst punishment for murder is death. But there's something worse than death. There's living when every single day feels like dying. Right now, this very moment, as you're listening to this, Bryan Kohberger sits in a cell number 163214. The Idaho Maximum Security Institution, J Block. 23 hours a day, he sits alone and isolated, cut off from the world. But he's not really alone, because through the prison's ventilation system, voices reach him. 32 of Idaho's most dangerous criminals. Men who've done unspeakable things. Men with nothing left to lose. And they won't let him forget. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. This is Bryan Kohberger's life. Every single day for the rest of his life. And here's the thing that keeps everyone up at night. We still don't know why he did it. Let me paint you a picture of what Bryan Kohberger's daily life looks like right now. He wakes up, if you can call it that, because he barely sleeps. The voices start before dawn, kicking doors, shouting through the vents. Psychological warfare that never veer stops. He receives 1 hour of outdoor recreation. That's it. Showers once in 2 days. When he moves, he's in restraints. Full restraints. Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective who's been following this case closely, said something that really stuck with me. He said, "It's driving him crazy. The inmates are tormenting him at night and almost all hours of the day. They're basically torturing him through using psychology." And you know what? Part of me thinks maybe that's exactly what he deserves. But another part of me wonders, is this justice? Or is this just revenge in slow motion? But here's what's really interesting about Kohberger in prison. It's not just the harassment that's breaking him down. It's the loss of control. Investigative journalist Howard Bloom, who literally wrote the book on this case, explained it perfectly. He said, "Murder is about control, and prison is the ultimate situation where you have no control." He's not responding well to that. See, Kohberger sees himself as, I don't know how else to put this. He sees himself as some kind of Hannibal Lecter figure, you know? The brilliant criminal who's above it all, who can analyze his own crimes with detachment, who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. But the other inmates, they're not impressed. Let me tell you what this guy complains about. Are you ready for this? He complained that he couldn't access JPay to place a commissary order. His supply bag didn't arrive on time, even though supply requests are processed on Sundays. It's written in the handbook. His cell was flooded. His meals were missing items. Someone threatened him. These were his complaints. Prison officials looked into it. They confirmed the threats were real, but they couldn't figure out who was responsible. Because when 32 dangerous men are using the ventilation system to coordinate, how do you stop that? And then, last August, something happened that nobody expected. Video footage, allegedly showing Kohberger inside a cell, started circulating online. At first, officials thought it was AI, a deep fake, the internet being the internet. But then they looked closer. Bree Derrick, the director of the Idaho Department of Corrections, sent an internal email that said, "These appear to be taken from inside IMS-1. We are taking this matter very seriously." As of January 2026, they still haven't figured out who leaked it. Someone inside that prison, someone with access to cameras, wanted the world to see Bryan Kohberger in his cage. You know what gets me about all of this? This is a PhD student, a guy who was studying criminology, who wrote academic papers about the psychology of killers, who thought he understood the criminal mind better than anyone. And now he's the subject, not the researcher. He wanted to study monsters. He became one instead. But how did we get here? How does a graduate student, someone who's supposed to be learning about crime prevention, end up stabbing 4 innocent people to death? To understand that, we need to go back, not to the beginning of the story, but to the moment everything became real. July 23rd, 2025, the day Bryan Kohberger heard his fate. Picture the courtroom in Ada County, Idaho. It's summer, the kind of heat that settles in and doesn't let go. The air feels heavy, not just from the temperature, but from everything that's about to happen. Families fill the benches. Some clutch photographs. Some hold hands. Some just stare straight ahead, bracing themselves. Media cameras line the walls. Every seat is taken. No one speaks above a whisper. And at the defense table sits Bryan Kohberger, clean cut, carefully groomed, and almost sterile. He doesn't look around the room. He doesn't look at the families. He stares straight ahead, expressionless, like he's watching a film about someone else's life. The judge looks down at him. Judge Stephen Hippler has read everything. The transcripts, the evidence, the statements. He's seen the footage. And then he says 2 words that land like a verdict all on their own. Faceless coward. The room goes still. He continues. You senselessly slaughtered 4 innocent students. There's no hesitation, no softening of language, no attempt to cushion the truth. Then the sentence. 10 years for burglary. 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for murder. Not concurrent, consecutive. 1 life sentence stacked on top of another, and another, and another. $50,000 in fines, $5,000 in civil penalties to each victim's family, as if any amount of money could ever come close to what was taken. But then the judge says something that cuts deeper than numbers ever could. He says the loss inflicted here was not just the deaths of children, siblings, or grandchildren. It ripped a hole in their souls, destroying a part of their very essence. A hole that doesn't heal, a loss that doesn't fade with time. And then comes the line that makes something painfully clear. Even if the court could force Bryan Kohberger to speak, which it legally cannot, there would be no guarantee that anything he said would be the truth. No confession, no explanation, and no closure. Just silence. Finally, the judge delivers his last words. The time has come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time for him to be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. No more attention, no more headlines, no more notoriety, just obscurity and silence. But before that silence settles in, the families are given the floor. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Your child, your sibling, your best friend, the person you thought you'd grow old with. Picture their laugh, their habits, the way they texted you late at night for no real reason at all. Now imagine they're gone, violently, suddenly and senselessly, and the person who did it refuses to tell you why. This is the fate of the 4 families that Kohberger murdered their children. Kaylee Goncalves, the mother of 21-year-old Kaylee Goncalves, stands up. She faces Bryan Kohberger directly, and she says something that echoes far beyond that courtroom. may you continue to live your life in misery. You are officially the property of the state of Idaho. Property, not a person. Property, because that's what he reduced her daughter to. Something to be taken, destroyed, discarded. And he didn't just do it once. He did it 4 times. Then another voice rises. A quieter one, but somehow even heavier. Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 roommates who survived that night.
Took them from me. My friends. My people who felt like my home. And then there are the panic attacks. The guy that swam into me like a tsunami out of nowhere. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't stop shaking. All I can do is scream because the emotional pain and the grief is too much to handle.
Bounds. She saw a figure dressed in black. She didn't understand what had happened until morning came. She's 21 now. She was 19 then, barely out of her teens. She speaks through tears directly to Bryan Kohberger. He didn't just take their lives. He took the light they carried into every room. She says he tried to take everything from her. Her friends, her safety, her identity, her future. That he shattered her in places she didn't even know could break. She reminds the courtroom she was barely 19 when it happened. 19. She should have been studying for exams, going to parties, making mistakes, falling in love, figuring out who she wanted to be. Instead, she learned how to survive the unimaginable. And Bryan Kohberger, as every statement is read, as every tear falls, as every parent breaks in front of him, there is nothing. I mean, no reaction, no visible emotion, and no remorse. Just emptiness. You might be asking yourself something. If the case was this strong, if the evidence was overwhelming, why wasn't there a trial? In June of 2025, Bryan Kohberger accepted a plea deal. He gave up his right to face a jury, gave up his right to appeal, gave up the chance to ever walk free. And in exchange, he avoided the death penalty. For many people, that was hard to accept. But prosecutor Bill Thompson explained the decision. He said there was nothing Kohberger could say that wouldn't be self-serving. Nothing that wouldn't further traumatize the families. Even if he talked, even if he offered a reason, it wouldn't be the truth. And Thompson made one final thing clear. One way or another, Bryan Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in prison. And that brings us to the question that refuses to go away. Why? Why did Bryan Kohberger murder 4 people he apparently didn't even know? Former Moscow Police Chief James Fry admitted something painfully honest. Sometimes, families don't get the why. He said new information could still come out. That sometimes, years later, someone finally speaks. But for now, here's what investigators know. They don't know if there was a specific target. They found no relationship between Kohberger and the victims, no connection, and no clear digital trail. 4 lives were taken, and no explanation, no closure, just a man in a cell, and families left holding questions that may never be answered. But maybe, just maybe, what surfaced after the case closed can offer a few clues. July 23rd, 2025, just hours after Kohberger was sentenced, Idaho State Police in the city of Moscow did something they'd been legally prevented from doing during the trial. They released hundreds of documents, police reports, interview transcripts, photos from the investigation. The public finally got to see what detectives had been working with, and some of it was deeply, deeply disturbing. Let's start with his apartment. When police executed a search warrant on Bryan Kohberger's residence, they expected to find, evidence of planning, murder weapons, something that would explain what he had done. Instead, what they found was birthday cards, criminology textbooks, vegan frozen pizza in the freezer. The prosecutor said the apartment had been thoroughly cleaned and contained nothing of evidentiary value. Think about that for a second. This is a PhD student in criminology. He literally studied forensic evidence, crime scene investigation, how to catch criminals. And he cleaned his apartment so thoroughly that police found nothing. It's chilling when you think about it. He knew exactly what he was doing. But while his apartment told them nothing, the people who knew him, they told police quite a bit. After the arrest, detectives interviewed everyone they could find: classmates, colleagues, teaching assistants, people who'd worked with Kohberger during his first semester at Washington State University in fall 2022. And a pattern emerged. Multiple women reported disturbing interactions. One witness said she had seen Kohberger blocking a female co-worker at her desk, physically blocking her, not letting her leave. Another said he had followed her and her co-worker to their cars in the parking lot. This wasn't flirting, this was intimidation. But here's what really makes your skin crawl. Remember, these murders happened on November 13th, 2022. Kohberger was arrested on December 30th. That's 47 days. During that time, he went to class, he interacted with other students, he talked about the case. One fellow doctoral student, someone who sat in seminars with him, who discussed criminal psychology with him, told police something incredible. Kohberger said that the Moscow killer must have been pretty good. That same student said Kohberger speculated the crime might have been a one-and-done occurrence. And then, and this is what kept me up at night when I read this, he expressed curiosity about the emotions involved in committing violent crimes. Do you understand what that means? He wasn't just studying criminology. He was studying his own crime in real time, analyzing it, discussing it, wondering aloud if the killer would strike again, all while sitting in a classroom full of people who had no idea they were talking to the actual murderer. And you know what? This pattern continued even after he was arrested. According to documents, Kohberger had conflicts with fellow inmates, even in county jail, before he was transferred to maximum security. On one occasion, he was on a video call with his mom, and another inmate yelled at the TV, just yelled, "You suck," at whatever was playing. Kohberger turned away from his mother mid-conversation to snap at this other inmate. Another prisoner called him a weirdo and said he would have assaulted him if not for fear of consequences. So we're building a picture here, right? Antagonistic toward women, obsessed with violent crime, socially awkward, unable to form genuine connections, arrogant, condescending. Experts, people who've studied cases like this for decades, they keep pointing to one thing: a self-important personality. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, more observant, more analytical. And that personality trait, it's both what may have driven him to kill and what's making his life in prison absolutely unbearable. But we still haven't answered the most important question. How did they catch him? Okay, so here's the thing that breaks this case wide open. November 13th, 2022. 4 people were murdered in their sleep. It was brutal, it was methodical, and whoever did it left almost no evidence behind. Almost. At the crime scene, investigators found something. A single item the killer either dropped or didn't realize he'd left behind. A knife sheath. The knife itself was never recovered. To this day, police don't know where it is, but the sheath was still there. On that sheath, on the snap button specifically, forensic analysts found something microscopic. Touch DNA. Here's how touch DNA works. Every time you touch something, you leave behind skin cells, tiny fragments of yourself. Most of the time, it's not enough to build a profile. But sometimes, under the right conditions, it is. And that's exactly what they did. They extracted DNA from that knife sheath. They built a profile. And then they used investigative genetic genealogy. You know those ancestry websites? Where people send in DNA samples to learn about their heritage. Law enforcement can use public genealogy databases to look for relatives of unknown DNA. They search for cousins, distant family matches, then build a family tree until they narrow down a suspect. That's how they found Bryan Kohberger. Not through fingerprints, not through a direct match, through relatives. His defense attorneys argued the method violated his constitutional rights. They filed motions to suppress the evidence. But the judge ruled that law enforcement's use of the technique did not violate his constitutional rights. The evidence stood. But DNA alone wasn't enough. Investigators looked at cell phone records, surveillance footage, traffic cameras, and they found something. A white Hyundai Elantra spotted near the crime scene multiple times in the hours before and after the murders. Driving slowly, circling. 47 days after the murders, December 30th, 2022, law enforcement surrounded a house in Pennsylvania. Bryan Kohberger was arrested without incident. The nation breathed a collective sigh of relief. But catching him and understanding him are two very different things. To understand what happened, we need to go back to that night. November 13th, 2022. The house was number 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho. From the outside, it looked like any college rental house. 6 students lived there, 6 young people trying to make it through another semester. Kaylee Goncalves, 21 years old, about to graduate. She had a job lined up in Austin, Texas. Madison Mogen, 21, Kaylee's best friend since childhood. They planned to move to Austin together. Xana Kernodle, 20 years old. Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, visiting his girlfriend that night. On November 12th, they went out. They had fun. They were being college students. By around 1:45 a.m., everyone was home. Sometime between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., someone entered the house through a sliding glass door. The attack was swift, personal, and brutal. I won't describe the violence in detail. What matters is this: 4 young people lost their lives. One of the surviving roommates woke up during the night. She heard sounds, movement. She opened her bedroom door and saw a man dressed in black wearing a mask. He walked past her and exited through the sliding door. She locked herself inside her room. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed from the house. Officers arrived to a scene many later described as one of the worst of their careers. 4 futures erased. For 47 days, the community lived in fear while the killer remained unidentified. Then on December 30th, the announcement came. A suspect had been arrested. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, a PhD student in criminology. He was studying how to catch killers, while being one himself. But who was he before all of this? Bryan Christopher Kohberger was born November 21st, 1994. He grew up in Pennsylvania. By most accounts, he was quiet, not particularly remarkable. He earned a bachelor's degree in psychology, then a master's in criminal justice. In 2022, he was accepted into a PhD program in criminology. He was studying the psychology of criminals, the emotions involved in violent crime. He conducted surveys asking convicted criminals about their thought processes during their offenses. Was he researching or preparing? After his arrest, former classmates and acquaintances described patterns in his behavior. Socially awkward, struggled with boundaries, and condescending. Believed he was more intelligent than those around him. Some experts pointed to traits associated with narcissism: grandiosity, lack of empathy, need for control. 8 days after the murders, he celebrated his birthday. Police later found birthday cards in his apartment. Family members wishing him well, expressing pride and love. And throughout the investigation and legal proceedings, he showed no visible remorse. So what are we dealing with? A psychopath? A narcissist? Someone attempting to commit the perfect crime to prove his intellectual superiority? We don't fully know. He studied criminology to understand criminals. He committed murder. And now he spends the rest of his life in prison, being studied. What an irony. So here we are, the end of the story. Except it isn't, because we still don't know why. Why that house? Why those 4 young people? Was there a specific target? or were they chosen at random? For the families, those questions remain. Moscow, Idaho is trying to heal. The house on King Road was demolished. Students return to campus, life continues. But it's not the same. This case changed conversations about genetic genealogy, privacy, and investigative methods. Bryan Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in prison. The victims are gone. And the motive, the reason that might make sense of all this, may never be fully understood. Maybe that's the hardest part. We want answers, we want logic, we want understanding. But sometimes there is none that satisfies. So we remember the victims. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. They mattered. They were loved. And their lives were worth more than the violence that ended them. And somewhere in a prison cell sits the only person who may truly know why. But he hasn't told us. So we remember them. And we hope that someday the full truth comes to light.